Okay, so I will introduce Richard Whittaker, who is the editor of Words and Conversations.
Works.
Works and Conversations at his magazine. And I've known about Richard for a long time and was hoping he would interview me. So here we are.
Nice, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Oh, it's a lovely little intimate circle. So that's. How many of you have her book, Full Circle? You've seen that? Anybody? No. Well, do you sell copies?
I do.
I would suggest getting a copy. I was amazed. I don't know Mary that well.
Mary Curtis.
Mary Curtis.
Thank you.
That's so unlike the way we do names, and I am getting used to it slowly.
Good.
But it does give an added aspect, Mary Curtis. Okay, so I found that book just fascinating by this man, Little John, who I don't know who he was, but I was told he was a wonderful, special person.
Yeah, he was a professor at UC Berkeley in the journalism department and a very dear friend. And one night at dinner, I got up the courage after a couple of months to say, David, would you mind writing a paragraph or two about my work? And he said, I'd be delighted. And so he wanted everything, my whole career, and he kept researching and doing all these things. And he wrote this wonderful book. And it came out maybe, 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And so anyway, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, it's quite a read, and you have had an amazing life. Reading that, there's way more than we'll even touch on. But I thought I would ask you, I like to ask people, I like to go back because it's very interesting to me, and I think to others, to learn a little bit about the roots. And I was struck by your parents. Well, you were born in Chicago, is that right?
That's right, yeah, Chicago.
And your parents, I gather, were culturally aware in some way.
Yes, they were, yeah.
And so so you were exposed early on to some arts and culture. Would you talk a little bit about your parents and what they contributed in terms of your art life?
Right. My parents were Midwesterners that had gone to really good schools. My mother went to Smith and my father went to the University of Chicago, and they were very intellectual, very tweedy. They were Francophiles, they were Anglophiles. They also drank a lot. So you had that kind of overlay of living with alcoholics, having an alcoholic parent. And so they also were very cultured. I mean, we lived near Cranbrook Institute, so we would go to Cranbrook and see the Kingswood and Cranbrook, the two schools, do all the Gilbert and Sullivan plays. Each year they do a new Gilbert and Sullivan opera. We went to films there. I saw that film Crème Blanc, White Mane, about the stallions in the south of France when I was probably about 7 or 8. We went to Chicago. We went to the Art Institute in Chicago. When I was 9, my mother and brother and I traveled from Kalamazoo, Michigan, and took the train all the way to Manhattan, where we went to the Metropolitan. We went to see Swan Lake, and I was in ballet class at the time. And I was thinking, I will not stop dancing until I can leap across the stage like that. Well, it never happened. But it was really great. And they were into great books. A club, they studied all, Aristotle and Socrates and all that kind of stuff. They were very, very intellectual. And And they couldn't understand me being an artist. They didn't get that. My mother, however, made things. She made all my clothes. I never had a store-bought dress. She had her little Singer sewing machine, and just before she died, I had the pleasure of telling her that she taught me how to design. She did. She said, "I did not." I said, "Yes, you did." We would go to the fabric store in Birmingham, Michigan. We would pick out a Butterick, a McCall's, or Simplicity fabric pattern. We would go look at the fabric. We would get the buttons, the zippers, the rick-rack, whatever we needed. We'd go home. You would spread your cutting board out on the floor. You put the fabric down and pin the pattern to the fabric. You'd cut it out in with your little pinking shears. You would take it over. You'd sew it up on your trusty little Singer sewing machine. I said, "You made a three-dimensional object. It happened to be a dress." And finally, I got through to her. And I said, and Granddad was an engineer, and I used to look at the blueprints that he was building an addition on his cottage. And so I just grew up with them taking me and my brother to museums and concerts and plays. And I just realized, you know, I appreciate it more and more as I get older.
Yeah.
And also my father had a beautiful tenor voice, and he knew about 125 folk songs. And so after he mixed a couple of martinis, he would, and I would be in the other room listening. Is it safe to go near him? Is it safe? And I would go through the door and I would start singing with him. And it was really wonderful. He changed. He metamorphosized into from having his temper tantrum when she came through the door after work, going upstairs, changing his clothes, and then he changed into the nice Ken Ratcliff. And he was safe, and so I would go in and I would sing with him. It was great, you know.
Well, you've referenced alcoholism, and I think that would be a possible conversation, but I don't think I want to go there because we have too much other stuff. But that's interesting to note.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note.
Yeah.
And so that's a great little sort of feeling. It's surprising, isn't it? How much we get from our parents, and in my case, anyway, it took a long time to understand what I got from my mother. But the more you said you appreciate things more and more. I mean, you see how much one gets from both parents.
Yes.
Indelibly.
Yeah.
At great, unbelievable depth, right?
Yeah.
And so, jumping forward to your college experiences. So I understand you went to a college near Boston as an undergrad.
Yeah, I went to a college at that time. First I started out, because academically I was zip. You know,
Zip?
You know, I just didn't get it. I didn't get math, I didn't get algebra, I didn't get Latin, I was just, so my parents didn't know what to do with me, because my brother was so smart, he started getting A's in kindergarten, so they shoved him off to the University of Chicago when he was 16, and he skipped his senior year in high school. So I can just see them sitting around thinking, well, we got rid of one of them. What are we going to do with this other one? Oh, I know. Let's send her to school in Switzerland. They said, would you like to go to Switzerland? Oh, would you like to go to school in Switzerland? I said, yes. So I did. I went my junior and senior year of high school to a Swiss boarding school on the shores of Lac Léman, Lake Geneva.
And is that a French-speaking part?
Yes, it's the French-speaking part, and there were about 9 of us dummies from America who didn't speak any French.
Wow. Well, you already had some boldness that you would be willing to do that.
Well, I kind of want to get it away from them, you know, in a way.
I see.
I did. but I was lucky. So I was 15 years old, and I was sent from Kalamazoo, Michigan to Manhattan, met by a family friend who twirled me around Manhattan and up the Empire State Building and down and put me on the Queen Elizabeth. So why not, you know? So I end up in France, and here I am. And my uncle, my mother's younger brother, lived in Paris, so there was somebody there. So he came and got me at the station.
So let's see, junior and senior years is like what, 15, 16?
I was 15,
15?
Yeah.
You end up in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And you don't speak French at that time?
Not at that time, no.
So talk about that. I would be interesting to hear a little bit about your experience there at that school that you...
It was a fascinating school. There were about 60 girls there. They were from all over the world. And that was an education in itself, just to meeting young girls. And I was not smart enough to get their addresses and follow them. I usually do that. If I know somebody, I follow them the rest of their life, like David. I met David when he was 4 years old. Oh my God. His mom was one of my best friends ever. Beautiful artist. Anyway, so I went to school there, and the first trimester, I had two Swiss German roommates. Okay, now, I didn't speak Swiss German, they didn't speak English, I didn't speak French, and they spoke a little bit of French. So we just stared at each other the whole time. It was very weird, very surreal. And so I would go to sleep with them speaking Swiss German, and I don't know if any of you know that. It's much harsher than High German, and them handing me pieces of Swiss chocolate. So that's how I went to sleep every night. Anyway, the school was really great. We got to go to the chocolate factory. We got to pick narcissus and above Lausanne in the spring.
Wow.
And we had 6 French classes a day.
Wow.
So I finally did learn French. But it was hard because there was so much English. And there were 2 English girls, and they said, "You don't speak English, you speak American." We were all very embarrassed, but anyway. Mm-hmm. But then there was this Dutch girl who spoke Dutch, German, Italian, English, and French, and she was 15 years old. I mean, I think she was a linguist, don't you think?
I've been in Europe a few times, and I get the idea there's a lot of those out there in Europe that speak all these languages, and how this sort of relative poverty we have in the U.S. But
I was really happy to finally learn to speak French, and Peter. When I met Peter, it was one of his requirements that.
And it gave you another view on America too, being over there.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, because in 1958, you did things the American way. That was how it was done. We were after the war, and everybody was the ugly American, didn't speak French, and they just yelled at people in Paris because they didn't speak English. But anyway, I learned that there was, the American way was one way of doing things. Only one way, and there were many other ways of doing exactly the same thing that might have been actually even more interesting and better. And I had great respect for Madame Dédy, who was the director of this school, and she had to ride herd on all these girls and make sure nothing terrible happened to them, because there was another school, Le Rosé, which was next door, and it had a few princes and people like that. We didn't have any princesses or anybody like that. We were much more ordinary, but she had to keep us apart, because we were, the old raging hormones when you're 16, 17. So anyway, I stayed there till I was 17, and by the time I got back to the States, I was a total snob. You know, because I'd been in Europe, and all these beautiful old buildings, and I would look around and say, oh, that building's only 200 years old, you know. It took me about a year to get over that, being a snob.
Well, from there, why don't you take us to RISD and your experiences at RISD?
Well, the good thing about going to school outside of Boston, I went to Pine Manor Junior College, and it was a 2-year school at the time. And I had an instructor who had graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design and Sculpture. And I had an elective. And this is just, you know, I'd made things my whole life. I didn't know you could be an artist as a career. I just did it, you know. So anyway, I took Mr. Lavin's class, and it was supposed to be a 2-dimensional class. And it turned very quickly into a 3-dimensional class.
For you or for everybody?
For everybody.
Oh.
Yeah, it just turned, because he was a sculptor, so he just made it into 3-dimensional class. So we had this project where we built a figure of a mother and child. We started with hard chicken wire, and then plaster gauze, and then plaster, and then you file it down and, you know, deform it. And I was doing my work in the studio, and I realized Mr. Lavin was watching me like this, and I thought, uh-oh, you know, and he went away, and a couple of weeks later he came back, and I realized he was watching me again, and I thought, oh my goodness, and he said, would you come in my office? I thought, oh dear, what have I done? He said, you should go to the Rhode Island School of Design. I said, what? You know, huh? I was 19, what did I know? Anyway, he said, well, I'll write your parents and tell them. I said, but my parents are in Tel Aviv. My father was working for the State Department at that time. He said, that's okay, just give me their address. Anyway, I ended up going to summer school. At that time, you had to go through this 6-week summer school, and it was like art boot camp.
I see.
You had 5 classes to do, and you could not go to sleep until you finished all your work. And it was just like I came out of that seeing differently. My perception was different after I went to this boot camp. And somehow, I don't know how, I got in. I really...
Well, the boot camp was Rhode Island School of Design boot camp?
No, it was a summer school.
Okay.
In order to get into winter school, you could have a PhD at Harvard, but you still had to go to this RISD summer school if you wanted to go there.
Okay.
And it's a very rigorous place. It's a marvelous school. I really wish that I could have stayed longer, because there were all sorts of things I wanted to do. I majored in sculpture, and I'm kind of a practical person, so I thought, well, you know, I'm not going to walk out of here and get a job as a sculptor. You know, that's just not going to happen. So I thought, well, what else could I do? So I went down to the industrial design department, and I looked around, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I could get a job if I knew how to do this from an industrial design point of view. And it was 1965. They didn't want any women in there. They didn't. And I didn't get in there, you know. They'd really discouraged me because I was female. It was before the women's movement, and I didn't know. I was still being very polite and unassertive.
Okay.
I had to learn that part.
So did I gather that you left Rhode Island School of Design without a degree? You left before you got a degree? No,
I did what, you know, a lot of people do. And my father used to say, sort of sneeringly, if you can do, if you can't, teach. So I went and got a teaching degree. At least I could earn a living, which I did.
So you got a teaching degree from some other school?
No, from RISD. The last year I went to the education department instead of the industrial design department.
But now I think I'm taking a lead from your book. It says that you found sculpture much to your liking somehow, and that developed somehow through this experience at at Rhode Island School, maybe through that class that came before.
Yeah, right. Well, I
But
just
somehow-
always made things from the time I was really, really
Okay,
little.
so that goes way
My
back.
brother and I used to draw all the time, and we made stuffed animals, we made erector sets, we made, you know, I knitted, I made dolls, you know, I'm just always making something.
Okay, okay.
And it was mostly three-dimensional,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, so we're in the mid-60s now. And so at what point do you become part of this group called Video Free X?
Freaks, video freaks,
Video Freaks.
right.
And so, well, talk about that. That's
Okay,
sounds like
that's
an
a really,
amazing-
yeah, that was really, as we used to say, a trip. Anyway, yes, I went to Manhattan. I thought I was going to get married, but that didn't work. But I ended up on the Upper East Side on 99th Street, and I went up with my little college degree, and I walked around Spanish Harlem to every school I could find, and finally I found a Catholic school that needed an art teacher. And then I found another Catholic school across town on the Upper West Side, at 89th or something. And so I got a job as teaching art. That was my first job, teaching art. And then, let's see, what happened? I was still up there. I met a man through a friend by the name of David Court. And David Court had gone to Brandeis, and he in the theatrical department, and he was doing a job in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which was not gentrified at that time. Anyway, he had this video equipment, and so I got introduced to it. Now, I've had a camera in my hands since I was a child. You know, I've always taken photographs. But this was a different kind of thing. But it was images, it was just moving images. And so it seemed really natural to me. And then I went to see my grandfather in Michigan, and I looked at the news, and I said, Woodstock. Oh, I know David's there. I just know he's there.
David?
David Court, my boyfriend at that time.
Okay.
I said, I know he's there. So I got back to Manhattan. I said, were you at Woodstock? He said, yeah, it was great, man. And I met this guy named Perry Teasdale, this young guy with another video camera. And we videotaped behind the scenes at Woodstock. None of the music stuff, that was, you know, that was being done. But we got behind the scenes, you know, everybody was tripping their brains out on acid. And that's all got on tape and everything like that. And he said, oh, and by the way, Perry's going to come and live with us. I said, oh, really? Luckily, Perry Teasdale turned out to be a lovely young man. And the three of us, about 2 months later, decided to start a group called Video Freaks, F-R-E-E-X. And there's a document. You saw it, didn't you, Howard? Yeah. Pretty trippy.
Yeah, here comes video.
Here come the Video Freaks. And so we were going along. We were in the counterculture in Manhattan. You know, we were hippie types, and we would just go out and we would just shoot whatever we felt like shooting. We'd hear about this dance performance or this music performance, and we'd just get all the equipment, which was a little heavy at the time, and we'd schlep it over and just shoot what we felt like shooting. And then after a while, I don't want to go into all the details, but we made a connection with CBS. And CBS, the assistant to the director of CBS wanted to have us document the avant-garde movement of the late 60s. We said, okay, I guess we got to do something. And then we started hiring people. So the three of us, original members, became 10. And it became this collective, and we just went all over the place. And one of the most interesting places we went to was Chicago to videotape the conspiracy trial. And David Court had gone to school with Abby Hoffman, So we got in to talk to Abby Hoffman and the Yippies, and Jerry Rubin was there, and then we got some great footage of Abby talking about the revolution. You know, man, we're gonna get, you know, we want dope. Anyway, then we made, and somehow through that connection, we made a connection to talk to the Black Panthers.
Wow.
And the Black Panthers in Chicago were being funded by a wealthy woman who had a condo, and the connection was, okay, let's go to the condo and talk to Fred Hampton. And so we did that, and it was really an incredible experience. He was only 22 years old. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And, you know, when we got back to, you know, put everything together to show it to CBS for their approval, he got killed by the Chicago police. And we realized that he was sitting here, there was another guy here and another guy there. One of those two guys was the snitch.
Oh, wow.
Because there was an underground person in the Panther Party who opened the door for the police at 4 o'clock in the morning so they could slaughter him.
Wow.
And it was just really, it was really amazing. And so when it came time to show CBS what we had done, we had this loft on Prince Street, and we had, you know, cameras set up and everything like that. And the doors open, and here these three dudes from CBS in their trench coats come out of the elevator, and they looked around like they were deer in the headlights. I mean, they probably haven't ever been below 42nd Street, you know. And so we put them in a loft next door and piped in on a monitor our show. And before that happened, the person who hired us, Dan West, came into the control room, and Perry and David and I, and said, we want you to show this tonight about Fred Hampton. And it was this soppy, watered down version of people looking at Fred Hampton's coffin as they filed by. And we said, no. And Perry looked at him and said, if you want us to show this thing, I'm gonna pull every plug in this studio. So we mutinied, and we showed our program. However, CBS was not pleased with us, because what we did was actually, up to that time, ABC, NBC, and CBS only showed scripted things on television. And there were no other channels. It was just those 3 channels. And we were showing what was actually happening. We never had scripts. We just videotaped what was happening, that's all. And so it was kind of like reality TV before reality TV. So the head of programming came out, and he'd had some beer because we gave him a 6-pack. He said, we will try to avoid putting this kind of thing on television for the next 7 years. And of course, it was another 20 years before they actually put anything like we were shooting. So anyway, the group, after that whole thing, I got tired of being in a group. I wanted to do my own thing. I had been doing this for 3.5 years, and so I ran away from home, and I came to California in 1973 for good.
Okay. What you'd gone out to California to document the avant-garde, so this was not your first trip to California?
Right, so it was thanks actually to CBS that I got out here first, because we did go out, they sent us to California as well.
So where did you go in California first? LA?
LA. We landed in LA with all this equipment, and they rented a big motor home with us, and we threw all the equipment in there. It was a 3 monitor system, so they had 3 cameras and 3 monitors. And I just basically stayed behind the camera the whole time, because editing videotape at that time, it was like audio tape. You had to splice it, and you had to put a little piece of tape on it, and it was, I was too impatient, so I just stayed behind the camera. So we came out here, and we did in about 3 weeks, we shot about 30 tapes, 30 half-an-hour tapes. Or no, they're actually 20 minutes. Those reel-to-reel Sony Portapack tapes were only 20 minutes long.
So were you shooting mostly artists, or?
Yeah, we went to Pacific High School up in Los Gatos, and that was total. Everybody was tripped out on acid, and you know, everybody, the kids, Oh, and the hog farm was there, and
Okay,
yeah.
with Wavy Gravy?
Wavy Gravy had broken his back, and he had this big cast on, and he was just sort of holding court. It was really great.
Who are some of the most memorable figures that you videotaped?
Well, Fred Hampton. There was a guy named Dr. Hippocrates. Dr. Hip. Do you remember him? Yeah. We got some tape of him. Yeah. Yes, he did. He did. Dr. Hip. Yeah. We videotaped him. David and I did that.
Did inflatables or Exploratorium?
Oh yes, and before the Exploratorium was the Exploratorium, it was this huge, big, huge open space, and the people from the Pacific High School had some people who'd made an inflatable, and I'm talking about an inflatable. If you squared this whole 80-foot by 15.5-foot gallery out and made an inflatable, it was that big, it was huge. And then of course they put this electronic music on it, and it was all just really tripped out. And I spent my time on one of those forklift things that goes up about 40 feet in the air, a cherry picker, and I just was on the camera. I was just panning back and forth for about 2 hours, back and forth like that. And so that was great. Who else did we? Well, Abby Hoffman was really an interesting guy. Yeah.
So you came out first to LA, and then did you end up
then
coming up?
We came all the way up, and I walked into a grocery store in LA at about 10 o'clock at night, and I saw all these vegetables all over the place, and I thought, oh my God, this is California. Look at all these vegetables. It's so beautiful, all the colors and stuff like that. And Perry looked at me and said, well, if you like Southern California, wait till you get to Northern California. So when I came out here, I knew where I was going to escape to,
Yeah, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
I totally understand that. And so, was it Berkeley or just California at large? I mean,
well, San Francisco. I started on Potrero Hill.
Okay.
In San Francisco.
So when did you land on Potrero Hill? Did you move in to San Francisco, and when was that exactly?
73.
73.
Yeah.
Now, somewhere around in there, I understand that you were somehow found what's referred to in the book as the goddess movement. Does that mean that you read something by Maria Gimbutas, or?
Yeah, right. Well, she was all part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the 70s, a lot of feminists were into the goddess movement, and there was a big conference down in Santa Cruz called Return of the Great Goddess, and Carol Christ came from Harvard and said, oh, this is the best, the most important religious movement in many, many decades and stuff like that. But it was just a bunch of feminists, and we were really sick of the patriarchy.
Okay.
We were just had it up to here.
Okay.
I had been married and divorced by then, so I'd really had it up to here.
Okay. Well, now that marriage and divorce, and the marriage was probably to this man who was connected with the Lakota Sioux. Is that right?
Yes, Cy Griffin.
That's a very. I'd love to hear about that episode of your life, because that sounds really interesting as well.
Well, before I went, I came out here permanently. I went back to get my stuff, and I met this man named Cy Griffin. And Cy was really an amazing person. He had worked on not Wall Street, in the advertising, Madison Avenue, right.
Walter Thompson.
And for J. Walter Thompson, and wore fancy suits and stuff like that. but he rebelled because all of a sudden one day he had 3 generals from the Vietnam War sitting in his office asking him to spin the Vietnam War. And he quit. He just absolutely quit. He refused to do it. The problem was he had 4 children, okay? And so I saw him, I met him at a party and I saw his show. He had these really amazing audio and visual shows with not one word. And they were, and he would fade one image in and out the other like that, and had all this beautiful music, and you'd fade it with a dial, and I learned how to do that because I ended up doing it for 2 weeks when the computer broke. But he lived on West 89th Street, and one day in his apartment he needed a slide ruler, and he found out that there was somebody 2 apartments below who had one. He knocked on Richard Erdos's door, and Richard Erdos, originally from Vienna, I think, was this amazing person who had gone around and taken his whole family in a Volkswagen bus around to the Hopi, the Navajo, the Lakota Sioux, all these different group, tribes, and on different reservations, and he made an archive that's now at Yale. Actually, Yale got it, and so Cy started talking to him, and for some reason, Richard said that they're going to do the ghost dance again. Now, the ghost dance had been outlawed in this country since after Wounded Knee, the book Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It was that era that when they come in and slaughtered the Lakota Sioux. And so Leonard Crow Dog, who was had a medicine man, he was actually the head medicine man for the American Indian movement. Remember that in the 70s? And when they were, Cy got to know him and his family, his father, Henry Crow Dog, and he had gone out to the Lakota Sioux reservation on Rosebud in South Dakota about maybe 3 times, and he become blood brothers with Leonard. And when I met him, he said, "Would you like to go to a Sundance ceremony?" And I said, "Sure, Well, I come from an atheist family, so I had no religious background, but I learned a lot about the Native Americans, about spirituality, and we drove from Manhattan with 2 of his children, Tracy and Jimmy, and another video artist. We drove about halfway from Manhattan to South Dakota, and we heard that the Sundancers had been arrested because they wanted to do, as a symbolic gesture, the Sundance in the little hamlet of Wounded Knee. There's a little tiny town called Wounded Knee. So they wanted to do the dance there. And they got all arrested and thrown in jail. There were 7 Sundancers. And we said, well, are we going to go all the way back to Manhattan, or are we going to go all the way to South Dakota? We said, let's go. And so by the time we got to South Dakota, the Sundancers had been sprung out of jail, and they'd set up the Sundance Circle, which is in 40 feet in diameter, and there's a pole in the middle, a birch tree, young birch, and from it are dangling down strips of cloth, one for the white race, one for the black race, one for the red, and one for the yellow. And that's the Sundance Circle was being smudged with
sage.
Sage, yes, thank you. And so the Sundance ceremony went on for 3 days and 3 nights, and the Sundancers had been doing sweat were in the sweat lodge, and so they were in this altered state, and they continued to be in the altered state. They were fasting and doing sweats at night, and the idea with the Lakota Sioux is you want to access your ancestors, and one of the ways you do it is go on a vision quest, which we're probably kind of familiar with. Another is being buried underground for 10 days, so it's deprivation.
Wow.
Yeah, and the third method is to do the sun dance. And so Leonard was the medicine man, and he kept chanting and doing, and there's the drumming, and there's singing, and it was just really like, here this little white girl from the Midwest. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So I just was cool. I tried to be as cool as I could be. But I was doing actually sound. There's a picture in the book of me with some headphones on. So then it comes the third day, and that's the day when they pierce their breasts with an eagle bone and tie themselves to the top of the tree with a leather thong, and then go back like this, and until they break the skin. And for some reason, they can access the ancestors. I don't know if it's through the pain, some kind of vision, but by then they're in a totally altered state because they've been fasting and they've been, sweat lodging and doing all these things. It was really extraordinary. I mean, it was an extraordinary experience for me, and it really affected me, and it affected my work.
Well, when you tell the story now, I can feel that you probably can go right back to that memory somewhere, right?
Yeah, right.
That's just a signature thing, those memories that stay totally intact in us like that, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. Because I started making these circular sculptures, and after I was at the Renaissance Fair, and I was doing props with David's mother. We built a 20-foot giant for the Renaissance Fair, and I decided to make a big pinwheel hoop and put my pinwheels and walk around and sell pinwheels at the Renaissance Fair. And then I started, one day I picked up that hoop with the ribbons dripping off at an angle, and I saw all the ribbons dripping down like that, and I sat down and I made about 10 different drawings, and that was my first series of sculptures. And then after I continued to make circular pieces, I kept saying, where did all these circles come from? And then I remembered, it's the teepee, the sweat lodge, the drum, the fire pit, the Sundance Circle, they're all circular. So it had gone down and then come up without me really being conscious of it. And I'm still doing circles.
Yeah, you mentioned that your family was very intellectual, your father particularly, right?
Not any more than my mother.
Okay, they both were.
Both were very,
So I was curious if you and I are about the same age, and when we grew up, the philosophical, I guess I could call it the fashion of the day, so to speak, was existentialism. Did you ever take any philosophy courses? Or
I did
ever?
not. I did not. I think my brother did, but I did not.
I was wondering if you felt influenced at all. Now, after existentialism, Sartre and Heidegger and Kierkegaard, after that, down the road came the postmodern critique, and that invaded the art world in a big way. And I just wondered if you got distracted by any of that, or you just continued your artistic path without worrying about this.
No, I didn't. And it's interesting because my brother actually became an art critic in Manhattan and New York, and he's still, for 50 years, he's an art critic in New York. So I made the stuff and he critiqued it.
And he probably dealt with that in whatever way he dealt with it.
Oh, I'm sure he did, right. But he would never write about me. Except when I was married to Cy Griffin, because I had a different name. He said nepotism. No. So it's really kind of infuriating, but he's supportive. But I'm sure Carter, you know, read all about all that stuff. And, you know, he's actually doing a very interesting blog now on Substack.
Okay.
He writes them every couple of weeks.
I've heard of Substack.
Yeah, so.
It seems like that experience that you described with the Lakota, so with the Sundance, has sort of stayed with you, and I'm sure that so many other things have as well. But how would you describe your? Oh, you know, I was going to ask you. I just forgot, but I wanted to ask you about performance and acting. We were chatting a week or two ago, and I think out of the blue I asked you, have you ever done any acting or performance? You said,
right.
Have I ever done any? You're like, let me tell you.
Well, yeah. My first stage debut was when I was 5, and I had my hair in little pigtails, and I was supposed to be the boy. So in this little duo singing "The Old Gray Mare, She Ain't What She Used to Be," and so I put my my little pigtails up on top of my head, and I had a boater hat on, and I was singing so hard and everything. One of them fell down, but I didn't even know it. But that was my debut, 5 years old. Okay, because I grew up in a summer resort in Michigan, and in the 1920s, one of the Parnell family built an amphitheater into the sand dune. So it looked like a Greek amphitheater with pillars and stuff, and then the seats coming down, and it was really great. So we did all sorts of different plays. They were called the Castle Capers, because it's called Castle Park is the name of this place. And so we would always do both at the end of July and the end of August, we would do a performance. And sometimes I would sing with some of the waiters and waitresses at the hotel. And I sang with them. I was 13, I think, Oklahoma. And then when I got older, I would do set design and let's see, or props. I did props for ACT and props for the Renaissance Fair, and so that's the. And then when I taught children, a lot of times we would do little, set up things and make puppets and make a puppet stage and do the whole thing. So that was really fun.
But then your hoop and ribbon pieces were used in ways
right.
You were performing. Your art actually entered into performance spaces in certain ways.
Yeah, right. At that conference in Santa Cruz, at the University of Santa Cruz, I had a big sculpture that's called Amelia, which is about a big white satin circle about that big with 10-foot wings, ribbons dripping down. That was hung from the in the stage during the whole conference, and it was great because it kept turning because it was kinetic, so it kept turning in space. And then for a dance performance, they threw light on it, yellow and red and green light on it. And then I made these things called dance wings, and they're not in this show, but they're made out of mylar, and they're a form like this. You saw those dance wings, didn't you? And you put them on you, and you just start dancing, and it's really great. They make such a wonderful noise, all this, stuff. And then if the lights on them, it's like a mirror, like at the bottom of a swimming pool. It reflects, and it reflects all over any surface. So those are pretty spectacular.
Well, you've done so much. You've done a lot of photography, sculpture, performance, and I was interested to see these little drawings that you can draw too. I mean, very well. I mean, you can draw, you paint,
Thank
you
you.
do photography, sculpture. What would you say? You've had a life of art making. You've had a life that's been rich in terms of all the interactions
Yeah,
and
really.
all the places you've gone, all the people you've met, and all the different. It's really kind of astonishing. Do you reflect or ever ask yourself what are the deepest things about this? I mean, what do you ever do that sort of thing? That kind of looking inward and asking
Yeah.
something like that?
I am exceedingly grateful. I'm really grateful that I have been able to, all these years, spend my life making things and getting my creativity to become three-dimensional. So it's not just in my head, you know, it's out here, and be able to share it with people.
Yeah.
I just feel really, really happy about that. And
Are there things that, when you reflect, stand out as the things that you feel most deeply, or the things that seem to come together in a way that stands apart a little bit from the rest of it? That the sort of, I hate to use the word high points, that seems trivializing somehow. You know, something that feels like this is and was something close to the heart of something.
Interesting question. Well, I think this show might be something that I'm able to really kind of manifest a lot of my ideas, because I don't know about you, but I've always had dreams of flying, you know. So you see a few wings around here. And I like birds, and pelicans. I think pelicans are just extraordinary, and they get to fly, and they, you know, look it down on. And so this show really expresses that whole idea of flight and being able to soar, you know. Actually, the closest thing I found to flying is downhill skiing on a sunny day. You know, that's the closest I came to it.
That's wonderful.
But I'm really interested in flying, and I mean, you know, I'm a little obsessed with it, I think. I mean, if you look around.
I kind of feel that is just the perfect place to sort of open this up if people want to ask you a question. I feel somehow that just as a beautiful, something about the dream of flight that speaks of the depth of possible freedom in ourselves somehow. You know? The possibility of a kind of freedom that we don't even know about, perhaps, but intuit, kind of.
Right.
You think it'd be okay to?
Sure. If anyone.
Anybody wants to ask any questions? I would like to say that the necklace, that's how I see that on the wall. There are the feathers with the little gold. You put gold on those feathers, right?
No, I can't claim that I did. I bought them that way.
I see. All right, well.
I just liked them.
And I was thinking that probably Nefertiti would be happy to wear that if it wasn't as big as it is. And did you feel any connection with anything Egyptian when you looked at that?
My father had a little bust. He and my mother went to Egypt, I think when I was little, and that came back with just a little bust of Nefertiti with this wonderful headdress with a flat surface on top. It was like a cone. And I really tuned in as a child to Egypt. Oh, I know, in 6th grade I had to do a paper, and I did wigs. I wrote a paper about wigs, and I started in Egypt. And I learned all about wigs and the fact that the ruling class had shaved their heads, the women shaved their heads, and they wore all these fancy schmancy wigs. And then they would put little balls of perfumed wax in them. And you know it's very hot in Egypt. And so they would start dripping down the face. And I thought that was amazing.
Wow.
And then I did this whole thing about, I went through the ages and went up to Marie Antoinette. Do you know she had 300 different wigs? And the reason why the doors at Versailles are so tall is because some of those wigs were this high. And so the women could walk through with their wigs on. And of course they powdered them with flowers, so there were lice all over the place. And so they would have these little long peak things, and they would, oh, Jesus. And they have ships on them, and the wigs were just extraordinary at that period. So I did, so I went from Egypt to Marie Antoinette in one fell swoop.
Well, it's a fascinating transition.
Yeah, Jason.
Yes, Jason.
Well, I was going to say I'm fascinated by this work that you're sitting in right now, and the commemoration. And can you talk a little bit about the process of doing it? And
Sure.
sort of where the inspiration comes from?
Yeah. Well, I'm absolutely fascinated with birds that do this. These particular ones are starlings, and I watched a lot of videos of them swooping and turning, and in a nanosecond the whole thing changes, and it's just amazing. And why they don't all run into each other and just fall to the ground, I have absolutely no idea. I don't understand that. I want to do more research. But I got the idea of doing one here because I wanted to do some new work, because this is 50 years of work, and that happened to be about birds in my career, but I wanted to do some new work. So I thought, a murmuration, that would be great. So I looked at all these videos, and this is actually a still from a video, and I had 600 birds laser cut out of paper. I did not cut these birds.
How many different, because I'm seeing so much variety as where they're flying up.
There's really only 3.
Are there only 3?
Yeah.
They can be flipped, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right. There's the wings down,
Yeah.
wings spread, and wings up.
That's it?
That's it. But if you flip them, then there's 6 variations.
It's just beautiful.
Thank you.
And I noticed that the circular piece up at the end there, you used those, and that you
Yeah.
painted a little bit of
I did,
feathers on
because
them.
in reality they have iridescence around their throats.
And then you did a little painting of the little ones on the wires.
Yeah, that's from a photograph I took of birds
That's
on
a
the
lovely,
wire.
I mean, that
Thank
circular
you. Yeah,
piece.
I have 3 more. In order to get those beveled edged canvases, I had to get them from an art store in Miami. And they wouldn't send me 1, they sent me 3. So I have 3 more like that. And I have big ideas about what I'm going to do with them. And they're going to have to do with these starlings too. So
It's a passenger pigeon up there?
that's Martha, yeah, Martha the messenger. She was the last passenger pigeon in this country who died in the Chicago Zoo in 1927. And that's an homage to Martha. Now, passenger pigeons apparently were just so all over the place. There were so many of them that in the 1900s and 1920s, that people used to just slaughter them for sport. It's like the buffalo, they're just for sport. you know. Anyway, so I decided to do an homage to Martha.
That's wonderful.
And then the other thing about it is that messages are sent through letters, and that was a collection of stamps that my father had. And so I inherited those, and I put it all together. And the maps are from Peter's mothers. Those are wonderful National Geographic maps, which had, from the 40s and the 50s, they had that beautiful color. And so I just kind of put it all together into that composition.
And that piece up there with the wire and the feathers hanging, it's sort of ineffable, a little breeze or something, and it moves the feathers.
Yeah, those are cockatoo feathers. Yeah.
And there was something, I heard that someone walked by it and sort of messed it up, and you had to
Yeah, well, they're very lightweight, and they just go.
So that became kind of somehow, to me, an additional benefit of the whole piece, that it could be like, and it was not destroyed, and you could.
Yeah, I
It
just
sort
put
of
it back together.
it breathes a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah,
you
it
know.
does.
Well, listen, I think this is great. I thank you for sharing all this. I mean, what an
Thank you very
amazing,
much.
Kind of a quick passage through this wonderful, amazing adventure you've had in living, which continues. Hopefully, I say this for all of us here, many more years.
Really,
right?
many more years, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Yay. Thank you. Yay.